All right, hello everyone. Lab 10, step 3. Let's jump into it here. I'm going to share my screen. All right. The third select statement requires that you insert values into the rental item table. So steps 1 and 2 have to have worked before you get into step 3. I'm going to scroll up here on step 2 and take a look at in step 2 here. You see that the query has here for the query select count from, and then the select statement that you put in, that you develop, right? And so in your log file, in your SQL file, in your script, you want to do this count rather than printing all of the rows, okay? Because you have 11,520 rows that will come back from your query. And so rather than print those to your log file for your validation, or for your query the first time you do your query, do the select count and then your query, and you get 11,520 rows, okay? So you should go into SQL Plus and look at what gets inserted into that table, even though you're not printing it out into the log file. Go in and look, make sure that you're getting the right results here, okay? And we're going to do the same kind of thing in step 3. Okay, it's going to be the 4,681 rows, not 11,000, but we're going to do a select count on that, so you're not printing another 4,681 rows. Okay. Let me go down to the end here, which is your result table here. So again, you should go into SQL Plus. You should look at these. Look at your data and make sure that you're getting the right data in your table. But we're going to do a select count with your select statement and show that it returns 4,681 rows without printing out all the rows. Okay. At the end here, I'll say it now, but I'm going to repeat it again by the end. Validation here. So you need to do the same validation in step 3 that you do in step 1 and 2. Okay, so you do the select count and your select statement to verify that your select statement is good, right? You're getting the right data. And then you do a select count from the transaction table to show that there are 0 rows currently in the transaction table. Then you do the insert with your select statement nested in your insert. And then you do a select count again after your insert that shows you have the 4,681 rows in your transaction table. Okay. Okay. So let's go through what the instructions say here. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, okay? Because you're going to reuse a lot from your first query, your from statement, from your first query, and use that as a starting point then for building your from clause for step 3 here. All right. The query I'll show you that. Okay, the query to support the select statement to the transaction table should return 4,681 rows, the same number that you put into the rental table. And why is that? It's because a transaction, a rental is a transaction. And in our file that we imported, all of the transactions are debit transactions, the 111 code, right? Therefore, those are all rentals. And so it's one-to-one in this case, right? The number of transactions that go into the transaction table is the same as the number of rentals that go into the rental table, all right? And when we get to lab 12, we'll deal with credit. Actually, in lab 11 with credit transactions. Okay, but for now, they're all debit transactions. Okay, unlike the query for the rental table, you can't use a distinct operator. You will use a sum function and a group by clause, and I'll show you that. Okay, we'll see how to do that. Okay, assuming that the query for the first select statement is your starting point, change the left join on the rental table to an inner join, because the rows must exist in the rental table before you enter rows in the transaction table. Okay, now he's going through in these sub-bullets here the joins in the from clause, okay, and how to construct the joins in the from clause. Before we do that, okay, let's go up and look at this transaction mapping table, okay, that he did for the transaction table, and a mapping table for the transaction table, and where everything is coming from. So when you do your select to insert the data, or first to count the data, right? When you do that, what are the columns you will put into that select? Well, here they are, all of these, right? Because that's what we're inserting into the transaction table. There's nothing in it. We're going to put everything in it. And so these are the columns that will be inserted into the transaction table. Right, so in your select clause, these will be your columns in your select clause. Okay, so where do they come from? So the transaction ID, let's just look at how this mapping table works. Okay, the transaction ID will come from the sequence generator, right? The transaction S1 sequence generator. The transaction account, and this is the ledger account. This is the 111 or the 222, right? The debit or the credit ledger account. That's what's in here. And where does that come from? So in the transaction table, it's the transaction account. In the transaction upload table, that is called the payment account number. Okay. And transaction type, what do we put into the transaction type column? Well, it's we get that from the common lookup table, the transaction type, right? So that we're going to do a join on the common lookup table to get the transaction type, and we will match on a column where in the common lookup table where transaction type or common lookup type equals the transaction type that's in the transaction upload table. Okay. So we'll see how to do that, or you know how to do that basically, but we'll see how we piece it together here, okay? The transaction date, where does that come from? It comes from the transaction upload table, the transaction date column, okay? Straightforward. The transaction amount, you see here it comes from the transaction upload table, but it is the sum of transaction amounts. Okay? Why? So the transaction table is on the same level with the rental table, right? A rental and a transaction are the same thing. But in the transaction upload table, there's a line, a row, for every item that was part of that transaction. Okay? So we tell Oracle, we want Oracle to find the transaction, and then for all of those items that are part of that same transaction, then sum up those the transaction amount, so that we get the total amount for the transaction. Anyway, we have to add up each item. Okay? Now, this sum here, we're actually going to modify this sum here a little bit, and I'll show you that, okay? And why we need to do that. Okay, then the rental ID in the transaction table comes from the rental ID in the rental table. Payment method type in the transaction table, again, comes from the common lookup table, so we're going to join twice to the common lookup table. So a second time here to get the payment method type, and then the payment account number. That's the membership account number, and where does that come from? The member, or I'm sorry, that's the credit card account number. Where does that come from? That comes from the member table, the credit card number that resides in the member table that's on file for that contact who belongs to that membership who did that rental transaction. Okay? All right. And then we have our who audit columns, right? And we will hard code those as we usually do. Okay? All right. So let's go down here to the instructions for step 3. And we left off here with changing the left join in the rental table to an inner join. Okay, start the same join that you had in step 1. And now we're going to modify that join, copy that down and modify that join to do what we needed to do here in step 3. Okay, let's take a look at add a sketch of that in my pseudo code. Okay, so what is our select statement going to look like here? Okay, so here's the heart of our select statement. We've got, so I'm going to give an overview of this first, and then we'll get into the details of this, okay? So we have the select statement that here that's the heart of what we're doing, where Oracle will get all of the data that we want. And the result table, okay, the result of this select will be an internal table in Oracle, right? Oracle will go, and based on our select and the tables that we join, Oracle will construct a result table, and we're going to give that result table that's in memory an alias of T at the end here, okay, so that we can refer to these columns that we need to refer to here with this alias. And where do we use this alias to refer to these columns? Up here in this outer select, okay? So this innermost select, we've got three levels here: our select count, from, and then our select, our second level select here, from, and then our third level select and from. So in this third level select down here, this is the heart of what we're doing. Okay, so we need to construct then this result table containing these columns. And I didn't list all of the columns here, so don't stop short here, okay? Again, this is my pseudocode, and I've listed some of the columns here. There are more. And then here's our from, and let's just look at the structure of our from here. So we start with the from clause in step 1, and so I've just put the shorthand here. Okay, from member M, and then inner join contact C, and then inner join transaction upload TU, and I went over that in the first video I sent you, right? And then in step 1, we have then a left join to the rental table. So our instructions say change that to an inner join to the rental table, give it an alias of R, and the join criteria is the same as in step 1. So the C.contact ID equals R.customer ID, and the R.checkout date equals the TU.checkout date, and R.return date equals TU.return date. Okay, same on clause criteria here, but now we make it an inner join to the rental table, and things will now match up because now we have data in the rental table. Okay, and then let's go back to our instructions here. We do this, we change the left join of the rental table to an inner join. Okay, the next join here, join the foregoing result set. The foregoing result set is result set of the prior join to the common lookup table on an inner join. Use the alias CL1 because we're going to join to the common lookup table twice. And this is done to narrow the limit of the selection rows anyway in the common lookup table. So here's basically here's the join to the common lookup table, where the column common lookup table is transaction type, and then what do you match on here? The common lookup type equals, and then what will this be? You're looking at the transaction upload table, right? So it'll be TU dot, and it will be up in our mapping table. Let's go up there to our mapping table, and we'll just take a look at it. Okay, here's our mapping table, and we've got it's in the transaction upload table, well, it's the transaction type from the transaction upload table, right? So tu dot transaction type. Okay. Back down to our instructions. And then we will join on the common lookup table again for what? For the payment method type, right? Which credit card is used? Cash is also a payment method, but which credit card is used? And so now when we do this second join to the common lookup table, use an alias of CL2. As if we were joining to a separate table, right? Because it's a separate join to the common lookup table. On the again, it's the table column is transaction. Now it's the payment method type, and where the common lookup type equals, and it's tu dot, the payment method type. Okay. Okay, now we're down to here, join the foregoing results set to so the next join is to the transaction table on a left join. Okay, now he says the trick here is figuring out the natural key, and he gives you all of the columns to join on. And what are you joining those columns to? I will show you that, okay? I will show you what this join looks like, okay? So hang with me here. Why are we doing this left join? Again, there's nothing in the transaction table right now, right? So when we're doing a left join, we take everything in the foregoing result set, all of the joins we've done so far, all of the data that Oracle has collected, and now we join it to the transaction table, and we say get everything that's in the. We want to include the columns of the transaction table, even though they don't have any data in them. Why? We need that transaction ID column because we are going to put a value into that transaction ID column, but we need to get it first into our result table, and this is how we do it. We do a left join on the transaction table that will bring in that column, brings in all of the columns, and all of the columns have null values. But that transaction ID column is the one that we are interested in. Okay, and it brings it in, and it will have, and here we see down here in the results set, yes, it's all nulls. That's what we want. And that's why we're doing this left join. It's a technique to get that transaction ID column included in our result set so that we can then change that null value using the nextVal function to a sequence generated transaction ID. Okay, so hold that thought, and well, let's go take a look at that right now. Okay, let's go back to the diagram here, the pseudocode. Okay, so we've done the inner join now to rental R, inner join on the common lookup table once, and then common lookup table again, CL2, and then a left join to the transaction table, and I've given it an alias here of TX. And now, what do we need to do? Let's go to the we're going to have our group by, and in our group by we'll have all of the non-function columns from above without the column aliases. We'll get to this a little bit more in a minute, but let's go up here and look at the columns that we are selecting. Okay. So these columns that we select here are the columns that will go into the transaction table. So we're getting some from the transaction upload table, some from the common lookup table. The rental ID we'll get from the rental table, so I don't show it here, but right, you'll have r.rental ID as rental ID. And why do we want to give it that column alias as rental ID? I'll show you here. Okay, so we construct this select here for the columns that we want Oracle to have in the result table. And then we have this outer select. Why do we have this outer select? Now all of this outer select will map to, because we tell it here, to map to the columns in this select statement using the alias, the column alias over here. Okay, so when we get done with this inner select, we've got an alias of T for the table, and then we have column aliases, and now we reference those here in this outer select. Okay, so now our outer select will now reference T.transaction account. Okay, the final result of the inner table, the alias to the inner table, T, and then transaction account, that name maps to this column alias. Okay, so we're using the table alias and the column alias from in here, now out here in this outer select. Okay, so excuse me, so T.transaction account, and here's transaction account. Okay, and then T.transaction amount, and here is transaction amount. So I'm not showing all of the columns here, but from this you see the pattern, right? So the second one, or the third one, will be T dot transaction type, right? And then the fourth one will be T dot transaction date, okay? And then T dot transaction amount. Now here you see in the inner select we're doing a sum. In the outer select now we don't do a sum because we've already done it. We've done the sum in here, and now we're taking this value and putting it into this column value here that will then eventually end up going into our insert. Okay? Now, you see that this sum sums the transaction amounts from the transaction upload table and then divides by 1.06. Why do we do that? Let's go to into SQL+, and I've run a query here. Select transaction amount from the transaction upload table where the first name equals Harry. Okay, so I run that query and I get 768 rows, but you see the transaction amount is 3.18. So in our transaction upload table, the cost, the amount to rent an item is $3.18. Our store value is $3. What has happened here? Well, in the transaction file that came to us, tax has been added. Okay, so this 18 cents represents a 6% tax, and so the total amount, right, of the items includes this 6% tax. When we're importing into the transaction, our transaction table, we don't want that tax. We want to know just the value of the rental excluding the tax. So we need to take the tax out. And that's how we do it. Now to add a 6% tax, you multiply by 1.06, right? So now to take the 6% tax out, we divide by 1.06 in our sum here. Okay, so that's our transaction amount. And now there are more columns that you need to have here and here, but that gives you the pattern of how to construct that. Okay. Now let's go to our group by and let's go back to the instructions. And read what it says about the group by. Okay, a group by clause has restrictions that differ across database implementations. So all relational databases will, versions of SQL will have a group by. In Oracle, you cannot include the column aliases in the group by. And you need to include all of the columns except, so all of the non-function columns, all of the columns except the sum column in the group by. Okay, so we'll take a look at that, and I will show you that group by, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that group by works. Okay, let's finish off the instructions here. The query and the select statement. So it doesn't need to return the who audit columns because you can put them into the insert statement. And anyway, he talks here about doing an update. Cross that out. No, we're not going to do an update. Okay, we're going to put these into the insert. Just put them into the insert. There is no update. So don't worry about that. Okay. So you don't need to worry, anything about this last bullet here. Okay. Let's go back to the pseudocode, okay, the big picture here, and finish off this outer select. Okay, so I talked about all of the columns except the first one, the transaction ID. Okay, so we're selecting this transaction ID. We gave the transaction table column alias or a table alias of TX here, and then in the select up here, then TX.transaction ID, we want that to be one of the columns selected, and it contains nulls, right? All null values. And so now we need to put a real value into that transaction ID. So we do that by using our NVL function in our outer select here. Okay, so we get T.transaction ID, so from the result table and the transaction ID from the result table, and I should have an alias here, tx.transaction ID. That might make it more complete to understand, right, as transaction ID. Okay, because this transaction ID name is this one here, right, that gets mapped. And now, so this value, using this column alias, gets put here. It's a null value, and so then you do your NVL, okay, T.transaction ID, and when it's null, what do you want? You want transaction S1.nextVal, right? And then you have your close paren, and then put transaction ID, transaction underscore ID again out here, right? So that you're using the null value function and the sequence generator. We now put a valid transaction ID in here, and now we have completed our select here. So the inner select gave us everything we needed except for a valid transaction ID, and so that's why. So a purpose of this outer select then is to all of these other columns come straight from inside here, but this one column we put the valid value in, and now we have all of the values here that we need to go into our insert. Okay, so when we're testing and you're doing in your SQL script, so test this, run it, make sure that you're seeing 4,681 and that the results look like the results from the table, right? But when you submit your SQL code, then just nest this in a select count from, and your select statement, and that should return 4,000, a count of 4,681. Meaning you got all the right things constructed here. Okay. Now you just take this and put now this into an insert statement. Got that parked over here. So in my pseudocode here, it's equivalent to taking now your select statement and now wrapping it inside of an insert. So now we'll end up with insert into transaction and then select, and I think we need some parens here for this select. So insert into transaction, now our outer select, our inner select, and we should get 4,681 rows inserted into the transaction table. Okay, that's the pseudocode. Now let's go look at the real code, at least part of the real code. I'll show you here. For this step 3 query. So let's look here at the left join, okay? So the left join with the transaction table alias of TX, and then what are we joining on? So we take those transaction upload columns and we find what is their equivalent, right? These are the natural key columns that Brother McLaughlin talks about in the instructions. And what do we match those to? Okay, so our tx.transaction account maps to our transaction upload payment account number, and then our transaction rental ID, we map that to the r.rental ID. Transaction type is a common lookup ID, right? The transaction date is the tu.transaction date. The transaction payment method type, again, comes from the common lookup. The second common lookup table that we joined. And then the tx.payment account number from the credit card number in the member table. Okay, so that's what your left join looks like. And now we have the group by, and so the group by lists all of the columns in the select. So I didn't show you all of the select, but here they are, right? Here are all the columns in the select without the column aliases. Up above, you need to put the column aliases, right? And all of the, except, right, the amount, the transaction amount, the sum. So all of the non-function columns from the select statement, in the select statement, need to be in the group by. So the transaction ID, payment account number, common lookup ID, transaction date, rental ID, common lookup ID, and the credit card number. And then look what we have here. Then our, and you need to put those into your select, right? Just hard code those up above in your inner select. And you can use 1 or 3 for the system user number, right? Sys8, 3 Sys8, okay? So that's how you get the group by. Okay, and then you see here then count transactions after insert. So select count from transaction, and now it should say 4,681. Okay, so you'll have 4 parts to step 3. You'll have the select count with your select statement inside that returns 4,681, and then you will have your select count from transaction, this same query here, that will return 0 because the transaction table is empty in the beginning. Then you will have your insert into transaction with your select inside, and that will insert 4,681 rows. And then you have your select count from transaction again to now show 4,681 rows in the table after you have done the insert. Okay, so I think that's it for step 3. And reach out as needed for help from your peers. The Google Hangout, I see people out there working together, good. Get with Josh, get with me, and we'll get you through Lab 10 here. Okay? All right, I will close this session.